Hello everyone, welcome to our channel. We are on Tawheed Halakha this week, the 58th session. The date is the 1st of December 2025. We are on volume 3, chapter 12, page 117. And the subject is clarifying the precise meaning of the word worship. Let's begin with the text. It is now time to clarify the meaning of al-ibadah, worship. Or, as the professor always mentions, enslaving oneself to Allah as a better definition. So, worshipping of a being in its true sense is exclusively the attribution of some aspects of uluhiyah, divinity, to that being. This is an indisputable certainty established by the formulas previously presented and demonstrated, one of which is worship of other than Allah, abdul ibadat ghayr Allah, equals attributing some aspect of divinity to other than Allah. This is also what the early generations of Salaf intuitively understood with their fitrah, pure disposition, without needing detailed proofs, as previously explained. They held the equivalence or equation which we have already stated, which is worship of Allah equals tawheedness of Allah, oneness of Allah, which equals testimony that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Therefore, attributing any aspect of divinity to any being is necessarily al-ibadah of that being, worship of that being, even if no other action is directed towards it. This is what some Wahhabis refer to as ibadah ittiqadiyah, a conceptual worship, or I guess a term that is imprecise and should be discarded because it implies that certain actions could be considered worship, even though they have no relation to belief. In truth, no action directed towards a being or connected to a being can be considered a ibadah unless it is preceded by the attribution of some aspect of divinity to that being and built upon that belief.
Maybe in the future, in next edition, we'll more precise thing. Ibadah is enslaving oneself to an entity based on that that's attributing some divinity aspect to it. So it's not only just attribution of divinity, that's the base of it, but doing an action or enslaving oneself to that entity based on attributing sovereignty or aspects of divinity to it. We'll make it more precise, inshallah, next edition. But from the previous discussion and addition we had, it should become more clear. More clear, yeah.
Any act of worship must be based on this prior attribution as a necessary condition. In fact, we may go even further to state that labeling any condition of the heart, such as uns, intimacy, or emotional response of the soul, such as rahba, or any physical reaction, such as ish arar al-julud, ish arar al-julud, I'm not sure what that is, the shuddering of the skin.
Getting goosebumps. Getting goosebumps, feeling such a feeling that you get goosebumps.
Yes. Or any specific voluntary act, such as prostration or utterance, such as madh, praise, or thana, glorification, as ibadah of a being, is merely figurative and a shorthand for saying that these acts are based on or arise from the true ibadah, which is the attribution of some aspect of divinity to that particular being. It follows that uluhiyah must precede al-ibadah in the order of existence, necessarily and without exception. If there is any deity at all, this deity must necessarily be Allah, the Mighty, the Wise. As for those who deny the existence of Allah, claiming that the universe is eternal and that tabi'iyah, nature, nature, which they describe as eternal, lifeless, blind, deaf, and mute, acts as a creative force out of necessity, such a nature, even if they claim it to be necessarily existent and internal, cannot be described as possessing uluhiyah, divinity, and does not deserve to be called a deity. Therefore, they are bound to assert that worship, i.e., the beliefs and actions of worshippers, which indeed exist, precedes the existence of the ilah, God, which in their view is nothing but a mental construct created by those beliefs and actions. This view is strikingly similar to that of the Wahhabi sect, whose erroneous views we have previously refuted and dismantled. Their core belief is that though humans' acts of worship directed towards a certain deity, that entity becomes a deity. Through human acts of worship directed towards a certain entity, the entity becomes a deity. Congratulations then to both groups. A bit of sarcasm. So ayah. So translation: Say God, the mercy lengthens the lives of the misguided until when they are confronted with what they have been warned about, either the punishment in this life or the hour of judgment, they realize who is worth situated and who has the weakest forces. But Allah gives more guidance to those who are guided, and good deeds of lasting merit are best and most rewarding in your Lord's sight. That's Quran, Surah 19, 75 to 76. Thus, ibadah, acts of worship, are those verbal expressions and actions that are either related to, directed towards, or devoted to a being that is believed to possess some aspect of uluhiyah, divinity. Specifically, they include words and actions that manifest or express submission, humility, obedience, reverence, respect, trust, reliance, fear, awe, love, intimacy, closeness, need, and dependence, or those that seek to attract benefit or repel harm from a divine being. Therefore, what people commonly refer to as ibadah, acts of worship, sha'air, rituals, or monastic rites, are not in themselves the essence of ibadah. Rather, they are expressions, manifestations, or applications of it. It follows necessarily that anyone who directs any of these acts of ibadah, provided they are correctly defined towards someone other than Allah, is a mushrik and a kafir. This is because such an action must necessarily be preceded by a belief in shirk and kufr. The acts performed by the mushrik or the words they utter are merely expressions, manifestations, and applications of that shirk and kufr, but they are not the essence of shirk or kufr in themselves. These acts merely constitute an increase in disbelief, similarly to the practice of al-nasi, deferring sacred months. Thus, the question frequently asked by the followers of the Wahhabi sect, what is the ruling of directing an act of worship to someone other than Allah, is a question that could only arise from those who mistakenly believe in a definitive list of isolated actions that are inherently deserving of being called ibadah. They assume that acts of worship can be defined independently of the concept of uluhiyah. In other words, the Wahhabi definition is as follows: ibadah equals a set of ibadat, which equals a specific exclusive list of acts of worship. This understanding is entirely false, as we have previously explained, and we will provide further elaboration here, as well as in the chapter specifically dedicated to the nature of sanctification and ritual acts of worship. Despite the clarity and certainty of the aforementioned proofs that demonstrate the falsehood of the Wahhabi understanding of ibadah, we will continue to refute their derivative positions one by one in the aforementioned chapter. Thus, it is essential, without exception, that the inner states of the heart, the emotional and psychological responses, and the voluntary words and actions encompassed by the term ibadah are only those that are directed towards or related to a being in whom some aspect of uluhiyah, divinity, is believed. We can elaborate on this further by examining a range of actions that humans commonly refer to as ibadah, along with the typical intentions and purposes that accompany these actions. The correct definition of ibadah, acts of worship, is as follows. Ibadat are inner states of the heart, emotional and psychological reactions, visible and hidden, verbal expressions and actions, and sha'air, specific rituals, with the latter being a structured combination of specific actions and words. These are either related to, directed towards, or devoted to a being in whom some aspect of uluhiyah, divinity, is believed. They are meant to express veneration, reverence, and sanctification for that being, to convey submission, humility, and subjugation, to seek closeness, intimacy, and the pleasure of that being, or to request its favor, kindness, and generosity. They may also involve seeking assistance in repelling harm or attracting benefit, or to avoid its wrath, punishment, or harm, and perhaps even to avert its malevolence or anger. The definition of the concept of ibadah, in its specific technical sense, used by people when discussing religion, religiosity, deities, and sanctification, is thus undoubtedly and certainly the only correct understanding that aligns with reality and is necessitated by the corroborating text of the Quran. Whether we find in the Quran accounts of the prophets such as ألا تعبدون إلا الله ألا تعبدوا إلا الله, worship no one but Allah.
ألا تعبدوا.
ألا تعبدوا إلا الله.
ألا.
ألا تعبدوا إلا الله.
The first one, ألا تعبدوا إلا الله, doesn't make it. ألا meaning come, do. No, this is ألا, do not. It is true, it is not. ألا, but it's compacted together, ألا. Double L, ألا. Originally it's ألا.
Next, اعبدوا الله ما لكم من إله غيره. Worship Allah, you have no other God other than Him. And those two verses are Surah 11:2 and Surah 11:84. From the above, we know with absolute certainty that these verses necessarily imply the following: foremost, to acknowledge, submit, and surrender to Allah's hakimiyah, which means His inherent right to command and forbid, an absolute right without restriction, except for what He has obligated or prohibited upon Himself. When you acknowledge and submit to Allah's hakimiyah, which is the pinnacle of ar-rububiyyah, you are simultaneously acknowledging and submitting to all of Allah's uluhiyyah. Since ar-rububiyyah is the backbone of uluhiyyah, secondly, do not believe in the divinity of anyone other than Allah, nor attribute any aspect of uluhiyyah to anyone other than Allah. Shirk with Allah, which is the worship of other than Allah, is realized through the attribution of even the smallest degree of uluhiyyah to another being. This means attributing any portion of uluhiyyah to anyone other than Allah, even if it pertains to a single aspect. Any being to whom divinity is attributed either has no existence outside the imagination of misguided mushrikeen, or it exists outside the mind, but the attribution of divinity to its falsehood, slander, and fabrication. Thus, ibadah of Allah has no meaning unless it involves the attribution of all divinity to Him, exalted and majestic. It is sufficient to focus on His hakimiyyah alone, for this is the pinnacle of al-rububiyyah, and al-rububiyyah is the backbone of al-uluhiyyah. This necessarily leads to tawheed and the rejection of shirk. It is utterly impossible for a mushrik to be a worshipper of Allah or a monotheist. However, it is possible for someone to believe in the existence of Allah or in some aspects of what is due to Allah. As for beings other than Allah, the attribution of even a portion of uluhiyyah is sufficient for us to speak of the ibadah of that other being, which is possible alongside shirk. Praise be to Allah who revealed the book. For we have sent the scripture down to you explaining everything, and as guidance and mercy and good news to those who devote themselves to Allah. That's from Quran 1689. تبيان كل شيء.
Yeah. تبيان لكل شيء. Explanation, clarifying for everything.
Now, next subsection, taken as lords besides Allah. What has been established upon the authority of Adi ibn Hatim is the prophetic wording which should suffice. I came upon the messenger of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him, sporting a gold cross around my neck. So he, the Prophet ﷺ, said, "O Adi, remove this wathan from your neck." I removed it. Then I approached him while he was reciting from Surah Al-Bara. The verse, they take their rabbis and monks as lords besides Allah. In reply, I said, O Messenger of Allah, we don't worship them. He replied, do they not forbid what Allah has made lawful, and then you forbid it? Do they not permit what Allah has forbidden, and then you permit it? Yes, I replied. He said, that is the worship of them. Specifically, the narration has been reported in the tafsir of Imam At-Tabari. In terms of its wording, the hadith is based upon that of Imam Abu Qarib, Muhammad ibn al-Ala, al-Hamdani, and it has other pathways of reporting as per Imam At-Tabari, so it's all Tabari. Whether extended or abbreviated, Al-Bukhari has mention of this too in Tarikh al-Kabir, as well as Al-Bayhaqi in his collection of Sunan. For At-Tirmidhi, who also has mention of this in his Sunan, he said, this is the Hasan Gharib hadith. Despite that, the truth is that it is resolutely Sahih. Ibn Hazm too narrates it, judging it Sahih, and he is well known for his strictness and exactitude. Reflect upon the prophetic wording here. Do they not forbid what Allah has made lawful, and you forbid it? Do they not permit what Allah has forbidden, and you then permit it? The phrase, and you then forbid it, can only by necessity mean in this context, you believe it to be prohibited or forbidden. Likewise, and you then permit it, meaning that you believe it is permissible and lawful. This belief cannot exist among those people except due to their conviction that the rabbis and monks possess the right to forbid and permit, and that it is the right to legislate. They hold that they have prerogative of command, or in other words, they attribute hakimiyya or rububiyyah, or ultimate sovereignty, or call it whatever you wish, to the rabbis and monks. Then reflect on his statement, that is their worship of them. Thus, attributing hakimiyya to the rabbis and monks is the very essence of ibadah directed towards them. Just a quick question. So this hadith, I know with your more recent insistence on multiple chains of narration to...
We don't need it. Okay,
because the Quran itself is sufficient.
Dump it in the bin. Just a story. But we don't. We did everything on the Quran. This is the Quran will not leave it for any hadith. But such a story illuminate that and give you an example how Prophet did to someone simple-minded when he objected that the Prophet was reading. They adopted their scribes and monks, or their rabbis, or their scholars and monks as Lord beside Allah. والمسيح ابن مريم, and the Christ Isa, the son of Mary, they were commanded to worship only one God. He say, for this, we did not, because the ayah ends, and they have been commanded to worship only one God. We did not worship them. A simple-minded meaning of worship, like the Wahhabi. He has a similar idea about worship, is like the Wahhabi, kissing, sujood, etc. No, we don't. And then say, I gave him, what was the meaning of worship in this situation, which is the peak really of worship, is that don't they legislate? If there's something in the scripture haram, then they have either single persons or a group of them meeting, and then they can legislate otherwise, and vice versa. For example, many, like the most famous example is that the early generation of Christian, they were the bishops and were married. Later on, the church decided that priests should not be married; they should be celibate. So they make it haram for priests. Before that, it was clearly halal, well established, and all the prophets in time past were married tons of wives, not only one. Even Paul himself said, "I prefer that the bishop should be married only to one woman, not too many, just one, so to be more closer to celibacy." They even did not prohibit that, and later on it was strictly prohibited. Later the Protestant rebelled against that, we know that. So, and they accepted that, they regarded it as the new law, the valid law. So they attributed them the right of legislation, the sovereignty, the ultimate sovereignty, etc. And he said, yes, we know that. Say, that is worship. So you are misunderstanding that accepting the legislation, they thought this had nothing to do with worship. That's actually the essence and the most important part of worship. While appointing Masih ibn Maryam as a Lord beside Allah is not only a matter of legislation, that's clear, but a matter of divine essence. All of it in the same level. They were commanded to slave themselves or submit to worship only one Lord, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he was surprised that Masih ibn Maryam, nobody is denying that they don't worship him. They say he's a god from the divine essence, etc., etc. That's okay, no problem. But Adi ibn Hatim said, Ma abadnahum, we didn't worship them, meaning the monks and scribes, not Isa. Isa, there's no dispute that they worship him. They believe he is divine. And they do all acts of service and so on, and calling for, etc., for help, supplication, etc. Actually, the supplication almost exclusively. Allah is very mentioned. In a case of emergency, Jesus Christ. They never say, oh God, except early. So there's no issue, but he said plural, but you don't worship him. Then, don't they do this? Say yes, that's the worship. That's the meaning, the correct meaning of worship. Not what you think as a simple-minded Christian, because he was Christian before that. Or the same way the simple-minded Wahhabi think. That's not. That's it. And until now, we have a book of some of the Madkhali Wahhabi saying Tawheed qabla al-Hakimiyya, as if Hakimiyya is not part of Tawheed. We should say until now they are stuck in that simple-mindedness. Actually, that's the catastrophic foundation. They built all their school and madhab on it. Okay. So Hadith Ibn Hatim are taking just a historic case, which you see how Allah spoke to them in a simple language. Simple language, they make haram halal, and you accept that, and you obey them in that, meaning you believe they have the right to do that. He didn't say you have to believe the right to do that. That will be a more fuqaha and mutakallimin and philosophic language. He made a simple language. Don't they forbid what's halal and make it haram, and you obey them in that? Say yes. That's the simple wording which even someone illiterate on the back will come and understand. If you understand it correctly, it's what I said. So then they come to what has been revealed already as haram, and then by giving themselves the sovereignty that they can change it into halal or vice versa, and you believe that they have the right, and then you follow based on that, that will be the expanded version. But the simple sentence gives that meaning, which any Bedouin, any simple man will understand right away. And they understood immediately, knew what's going on. It doesn't need a very lengthy explanation. This explanation is clear. That's including the meaning of ibadah, of enslaving oneself to Allah. That's actually the most important thing, the core meaning. The external acts are really very secondary, bowing and prostrating and so on, secondary. Even the Christian regards it as secondary, indeed. Okay, but that's the most important one. And even they, the common people of them, and many of them, even scholars, do not regard that an issue of worship or ibadah, because they have in their mind, their mind is having the same problem like the Wahhabi have. Yeah.
They've effectively neutered. They've confined the deen.
Yeah.
Okay. Viewed from another perspective, it is clear that people's stances regarding the relationship between actions they call ibadat, acts of worship, in this specific sense, when speaking about deities, religion, religiosity, and sanctification, and the concept of ilah, deity, which can be classified logically and strictly into one of the following positions that will be set out. Firstly, divinity, uluhiyya, has a definition that is entirely independent of the actions and attitudes of other beings. Whoever possesses any attribute of divinity is correctly termed ilah, God. Meanwhile, ibadat are merely a classification used by people to denote any act, whether internal or external, or any statement, whether from the heart or the tongue, that is directed towards or related to a being believed to be an ilah. These acts serve to express submission, humility, obedience, reverence, or fear and awe, or to convey poverty, need, and the request for bringing about benefit or repelling harm, or to express affection, love, intimacy, and seeking proximity.
Or even one of them, not all of them. For example, I think later here or the other special chapter, we mentioned the specific case of jinn. The people were believing that the jinn can escape from the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in this aspect, they have equal power, not even to do, but to run away from him. And based on that, all their sacrifices to the jinn and so on is become the really act of enslavement, act of ibadah. It's not based on fear of physical capabilities, like you fear the lion and give him throw to him some some meat so you can escape up the tree. That's based on knowing that the lion can eat the meat. So, no, for the jinn, they can escape from control of Allah. That made them having a divine aspect, and then sacrificing for them is obviously an act of ibadah. That while throwing a big piece of meat to a lion who is attacking against you, so he gets busy with the meat, and you can mount to the tree or get in your car, is not ibadah. It's just a normal reaction to something fearful which can reach you. Unless you believe the lion will reach you, even if Allah interferes, then obviously you regard the lion as powerful as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But nobody thinks this way about lions. But about jinn, because they're hidden creature and they're spiritual and so on, and the issue may come in their mind, or the devil can tell them. They even told the jinn that you can escape from Allah. Don't worry, we are able to run away from Allah. That's in Surah Al-Jinn. وأنه كان يقول سفيهنا على الله وإن ظننا كما ظننتم أن لن نعجزها في الأرض ولن نعجزها هربا. Now we know that we cannot run away from Allah. Before that, the devil told us, you can, don't worry, you can escape him. Meaning, at least in a possibility of escaping, you have the power to outsmart or outrun Allah. That gave them a very small aspect of divinity, but that's enough. That's enough. So all acts direct to them, usually acts of fear. To fear, because they usually regard it as evil. How to get away from evil with this guy is just fear. No love. Nobody loves jinn. When they do a sacrifice, they don't love jinn. They're afraid of jinn. But because it's fearful, because their evil ability and ability, they know nothing can protect from their evil. Even Allah cannot protect. So you have to appease them by sacrifice or by donation to the temple and things like that, or to certain representation of them and so on. Then that is shirk, and this is ibadah, because of that belief, not because of just the act itself. Act itself can be done without any relation to ibadah. That example, I think, is either here or in that special chapter in which we discussed sujood, this and this and this, everything which they say, we discuss one by one. So no, absolutely not. It can be, and sometimes it can. In such a situation, it's ibadah, also worship. In other situation, is not. What's the distinction? If we look thoroughly, it is only if it's connected to the belief in divinity or a part divinity, then it's worship of that divinity. If it is not, then it is just a natural reaction, like fear, like getting goosebumps. If you go, for example, if you're walking in the dark and come through a graveyard or cemetery, you may feel something strange and you get goosebumps. That's not really ibadah. Something mysterious there which could be harmful. Maybe a spirit, maybe an animal hiding. Until you believe this can run away from Allah, and you cannot protect yourself by him except by appeasing him. That's the problem. Then you are getting out of natural fear, which is understandable, into fear, which of type worship, because of that belief, not because of the natural reaction, the goosebumps and the trembling of the heart. Not that. That can be expression of this natural reaction to a natural situation. But definitely, if a lion charge against you, you will try to escape to the car. And if you lock the door, you believe that you have. So you will use tools of the universe to undermine the lion. But in the case of jinn, whatever you do, it will not help unless you appease him by sacrifice. That's attributing him the ability that even Allah will not be able to save you from him. And he can't get away with harming you and get away unless you appease him by sacrifice, by whatever action he wants from you and so on. Most of that of the imagination, khurafat and myths, but still the mere belief itself is a catastrophe. Not that it's a reality or no reality. It may have never been realized in history, but if people think that in their mind, that's it. Nothing can help. Good. And that is one example where also clearly the definition of Taymiyyah that ibadah is the extreme of submission, dhul, humility, next to the extreme of love. What is this for in the case of jinn? Yes, humility is there and fear, but what's about love? It's actually hate. Who loves the jinn? Who can harm or can send by a magician to harm you? The people believe like that, especially in backward countries and villages and so on. Not even backward, in France, by the way. A person I know who was living in France for many years, you find in the ads in the second page, people telling you, mostly African, that they're master of black magic and they can control jinn and send jinn and things like that. And they offer the services and give you phone number to contact. You don't need to go to villages in Africa and India and Pakistan. You find it inside Paris. Yeah. So these irrational fears of hidden jinn and demons and things like that, in many cases, it reaches a level of ibadah. The moment it reaches crosses the red line of giving them power to harm or to run away or so, equal to the power of Allah, at least in this one specific aspect, خلاص, game over. You have distributed divinity, and any action direct to them, in that case, will be appeasement to avoid their harm. There's no love there. There's actually hate, but how can I get away from this jinni? Only by appeasing him, not by supplication with Allah or invoking some kind of rosary in the case where if you are Catholic. No. You have to do directly. Address him, please stay away from me. Say, that would be sacrifice for me, something like that. Slaughter something for me, or kill a baby for me, like these famous horror story we hear about Satan worshipper, and they do satanic ritual, including sacrificing babies or human sacrifices. That's definitely based on the believing these entities have such a power that they can. They need that extreme type of sacrifice to appease them or to avoid their harm, or express their admiration for that. For example, some Satanists do that to express their admiration for the devil, that he has the courage to rebel against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they are regarding that aspect as worthy of honoration. And something worthy of praise. That's also aspect of attributing some divine aspect to him. Yeah, and so on.
Okay, continue.
Yeah, carry on.
If this is true, and it is evidenced by the definitive proofs we have presented, with more to come by the will of Allah, it follows necessarily that no internal or external statement or action, whether prostration, bowing, bending, standing, bending, sitting, walking, or running, whether sanctifying, offering gifts, lighting candles, or burning incense, whether love, hatred, reverence, intention, desire, fear, hope, supplication, or seeking refuge, or any composite ritual, considering some of these, can be considered or termed as ibadah, unless it is directed or towards or related to an ilah. However, if the same action is directed towards or related to something else in which no divinity is believed, then it cannot be considered ibadah at all, and it is impermissible to call it as such. Whoever does this has denied the Quran, lied against Allah, and committed the gravest of slanders. The second position, certain actions by their very nature are classified as acts of ibadah in and of themselves, regardless of the belief or perception of the one performing them concerning the being to whom they are directed or related. This is in fact the position of the Wahhabi sect, when their statements are thoroughly analyzed, as these statements are typically characterized by superficiality, ambiguity, inaccuracy, confusion, and contradiction, sometimes involving implicit or even explicit circular reasoning. On this basis,
especially the issue of calling on someone, and they try to, because there are clear callings which is not ibadah, and they call dua al-masala. You ask something, you call someone you are in the street and you call in the 10th floor, hey Omar, throw me something like that. You're calling someone to give you something. How to distinguish that from calling, which is called nida al-ibadah, or calling for which is ibadah? And then they try to find this distinctive mark they could not find until Shawkani developed themselves. If you ask from someone something which is only Allah can do, then this is ibadah. And otherwise, it's not ibadah, it's not shirk, you're not mushrik, it's just dua masala, which is maybe okay, maybe haram, maybe halal, but not shirk. But even this characteristic of Shawkani, we analyzed in the appropriate, we show that it's either circular or internally contradictory. That's the problem, because in the application, for example, the question arises: what meaning something which only Allah can do? Is that according to your belief or their belief? Their belief is the relevant one, what they are calling on. If they are calling it, if you ask them, you're calling someone is calling, for example, the Prophet, help me, or be intermediate Yawm al-Qiyamah, or something like that. Then you ask him, you're asking something which only Allah can do. Say, who told you that? I'm asking them to do that. I know that Allah empowered him to do that. So it's not only that this is the empowerment of Allah for him. He doesn't have the power intrinsically. It's given by Allah. So according to your belief, this is only accessible to Allah, but He gave the Prophet the authority to do that, for example. Right? And then, so the issue is his belief, not your belief. Your classification may be what you think, but it may be not what the other one thinks. So you have to check what is the content of his belief. So the distinction of Shawkani, which he thought he solved the problem, doesn't solve the problem. In other situations, similarly. And then he may say, who told you that's only accessible to Allah? Allah may give some people power. Then you have to prove that it's not possible. And if you prove to him, he would stop. If it proves it. But maybe he proved you the opposite too. Like, for example, many Sahaba were asking Prophet ﷺ, like one Thawban, you say, I served the Prophet for some time very intensively, hoping that one day he will ask me to ask him something. So the day came, say, Prophet said, Is'alni, ask me something. So I said, I ask you only one thing, to be your companion in Jannah. What does it mean? Is the Jannah the keys behind the Prophet? He doesn't that. He knows it is not so. But that you ask Allah, and you have such a rank in Allah that He will respond to you positively, that I will be your companion in Jannah. So I'll be protected from dying on kufr or being misled and so on from day one. So the Lord, he said, long time thinking. And then he said, then help me by kathrat al-sujud. Do plenty of prostration. Maybe he saw him, he's praying only the obligatory prayer, and he wanted him to do more prayer, for example, because he was from Ahl Sufa, and they are devoted to Quran and praying at night, reading Quran at night, and so at that day they go and collect wood and so on and live from it, or give it as free charity. So they devoted to, like monks essentially, and recording the Quran, memorizing it. But maybe he noticed he doesn't have a good share of supplication, of salah. With sujood? Sujood meaning part of salah, because usually sujood, Muslims do not do sujood free, except in single situation. You receive a good news, you make sujood shukran. This is not rare. But the regular sujood is in salah. So meaning, do more salah, do more nafila. Help me worship. So then I say, how can you ask him for this? And if you ask Thawban, do you think the Prophet can admit you Jannah disregarding Allah Ta'ala? You say, A'udhu Billah. No. I want him to companion. I know that if he asks Allah for that, Allah will respond to him. He will tell me that I am a happy man. I have escaped. I'm essentially as if I have already died while still alive. I'm guaranteed Jannah, because you have no guarantee of Jannah or A'udhu Billah an-nar unless you die in a certain state. But in your life, you don't know. So I wanted this guarantee. That's exactly what he said. So asking for something which only Allah is in Allah's power. Entering in Jannah or is only in Allah's power. But the messenger can supplicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you ask him, let me be your companion in Jannah directly, at face, it looks like he thinks the Prophet is the one who admit to Jannah and to close the door in face of some people. It's not true. No. It's no way. It's in the hand of Allah exclusively. But he grants some people shafa'ah, grants just to honor them and give them certain ranking. I said, it's standing. That's it. So what is his belief? So the Shawkani's solution is not a solution. But they didn't have even, Abdul did not, was unable until Shawkani came and did that for them. It didn't work either. So you see how miserable the whole thing is if you disconnected from previous belief in a certain type of divinity, and this required to define what is divinity. Power, creating, separating your creation, having your creation completely under your control, nobody can interfere with them. But even smaller sub-action, like running away from Allah, confronting Allah, like the cosmic revolutionary Iblis, according to Satanist, he's the first revolutionary against the cosmic tyrant, things like that. Then he attributed to him divinity, because he's the revolutionary. Revolutionary is something good against the tyrant, and Allah is the tyrant, ta'yadun billah. So Iblis is then revolutionary, is worthy of praise, more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, respect of divinity. So whatever you do toward the devil, you have made the devil partner of Allah or anti-partner of Allah, certain things. And no entity in existence can be equal to Allah or anti-Allah in any respect. There's no way. Neither running away nor rebelling without cosmic permission. The devil could not have rebelled without Allah giving him the capability and the free will to make that choice. It's not but any intrinsic power. If you don't believe that, then you will never say the rebel against Allah, the tyrant. Because Allah couldn't be a tyrant if He gave him that freedom to the level, even if he rebel against me, I will allow that to happen. And you take the responsibility for that, because you're just undermining the principle of rationality and reason, that you should appreciate the one who gave you these capabilities. Instead, you did not appreciate it. For example, I'm mentioning so many examples so that it enlightens in your mind. It doesn't mean that he must be able to create a universe and be sweat. No, enough he can run away from Allah and Allah cannot catch him. That's enough. That meaning he have in this aspect equal power to Allah. If it's only running away. Or in the case of Iblis, it's a bit subtle, but he is rebelling against Allah, and thus he is a revolutionary. But it's not true, because his rebellion, based on his free, that he has a free will, who gave him the free will and make it so free that even he can rebel against Allah. Allah will give him that for certain wisdom, universal setup specifically, but doesn't have it against the will of Allah, or not mechanical. Allah is certainly surprised by this shock. No, it's not surprised. The possibility is always there. It's always there. The moment you give free will, genuine free will, a genuine free will would be only genuine if the one who has the free will could rebel against you. And only Allah is capable of creating such a free will. And all of these things. This way then made the devil then really another divine being. Or even you call it evil one, you call it revolutionary, if you're a good one, and the other one is tyrant, whatever you call it, it doesn't help. It's you constructed something which is having divine attributes, or sufficiently anti-divine attributes to be divine on the opposite negative sense. And that's it. Like the evil god of the extreme Majusi. Because the early Majusi did not have tools like a shaitan, but later developed into a divine being, because they could not solve the problem of evil in the universe. He can create evil in opposition to Allah. Allah cannot prevent him from doing that. That's an attribute of divinity, even if it's only evil. So it doesn't need to be only good, but it can be this and this. It can be positive and negative. Okay, so that's the problem when you do not put divinity first, an aspect of divinity which may be subtle, but you have to analyze it rationally on its own. Not if there's someone is bowing or making sujood or praising or no, that's not the issue. The issue, that thing in itself, even if it's an imaginary thing in your mind, which attributes he has. The moment he has certain attributes, which is divine or challenging the divine or running away from the divine or undermining the design of the divine or including devils, demiurgic existences, demigods, and so on, then you attribute the aspect of divinity to that being, and whatever the acts related to that, because usually you will not have the general acts for the jinn, for example. They were just sacrificing to them in an attempt to stop the magic and the problem the jinn causing. Nobody is making hajj to them and love them and so on. No. Why? All what I need is just to get away from his evil doing. Nobody else can help me, not even Allah, because this has this capability of doing harm and running away. So I have to stop him doing harm by appeasing him, by making him happy with me, by sacrificing something, either an animal or even worse, human sacrifice and things like that. Okay, so this way the whole picture becomes clear, what we are dealing with. it doesn't need that the one you are attributing divinity to has to full divinity or full characteristic. No. The moment really a genuine aspect of divinity is attributed to him, that's already you're getting in the domain of shirk. You're going to get this is the domain of shirk right away. Like for example, monks and rabbis or scholars and scribes and devotee monks called monks in Christianity and Judaism, that they can legislate and the people accept that as a valid legislation. That's aspect of divinity. Otherwise, nobody thinks that they are immortal or that they can raise themselves by themselves from the grave or no. Nobody believes in that ever. Or they can even fly without wings and without machines. No. But only that aspect they can legislate. And their legislation is legitimate. They have the right of legislation. We know that the tyrants legislate as they desire, but nobody regards that as the right. You may be forced to obey, but they are not worthy of obedience. But what can I do? That's all is in my neck. You're not giving them any divine attributes, even if you're forced in obedience. Okay, so carry on. Anyway, I try to give some examples yourself down the road I mentioned and discussed in detail to see that really I expanded that maybe too much. Maybe the next edition will try slim a little bit the discussion because I went ad nauseum, as I said, discussing every point ad nauseum. Okay, carry on.
Okay. On this basis, some claim, for example, but not limited to the following, that military salutes and saluting the flag constitute kufr, disbelief, that expels one from Islam because they involve standing motionless with complete humility in a specific posture. This ruling applies even if the person believes and is absolutely certain that the military officers or flags are created beings, entirely subjected and powerless, who can neither act nor decide except by Allah's permission and decree. And even if they believe that the flag is merely a piece of cloth tied to a pole, possessing no life, hearing, or sight, and no power to bring benefit or harm. Similarly, some claim that seeking help from the Prophet ﷺ and his family constitutes shirk akbar, major polytheism, merely by uttering it, regardless of the belief on the one seeking help from the Prophet ﷺ and his family, even if they firmly believe and are absolutely certain that he is a created being, entirely subjected and powerless, who possesses neither harm nor benefit for himself, nor does he control death, life, or resurrection, except by what Allah has given him and empowered him to do so. All that circumambulating the grave of Abdul Qadir al-Jilani or Ahmad al-Badawi constitute disbelief that expels one from Islam merely due to the act itself by virtue of the circumambulation, resembling outwardly the circumambulation around the Kaaba, regardless of the beliefs of the person performing the act concerning Abdul Qadir al-Jilani or Ahmad al-Badawi. Therefore, the relationship between the definition of uluhiyya and the definition of ibadah in this second approach is necessarily that ibadah is the foundation. It is defined as constituting specific actions, thus resulting in a list of certain actions labeled as acts of worship, ibadat, with the ilah being the one to whom these actions are directed. In short, the ilah is the one who is worshipped. The second approach, although free from internal circular reasoning and contradiction, is nevertheless false and cannot be accepted by its proponents, as there is a definitive evidence from the authoritative texts of the Quran and the prophetic Sunnah, because these are the only valid legal texts, and even before that, from the
divine shirk and
necessities.
kufr, or the divine shirk and kufr, is a Sharia definition. That's a Sharia definition. But what is shirk? What is shirk? Which is contradict Tawheed, contradict Islam. And the Quran is sufficient to define that clearly. And that second approach is refuted by the Quran in many places in general, in the general equations we studied, and also in special cases. Like, for example, there was a mention of the special chapter, but let me give a quick example. Like sujood. They say sujood is ibadah, but they get stuck then. What's about sujood of the angels to Adam? Say, oh, it is not ibadah because Allah commanded it, meaning Allah can command to worship someone else. There's a problem there. Okay, leave that. That's by Allah command. What's about sujood of Yaqub, and who is a prophet, supposed to be infallible and not committing shirk, and supposed to be muwahid and never committing shirk, and the family of Yusuf, for him who entered Egypt. They say this is sujood for greeting. Okay, so some sujood is greeting, it's not ibadah. How come? What is then the distinction between sujood ibadah and sujood greeting? A third example, you make the body movement of sujood as a sport movement to strengthen the back muscle, for example, or the neck muscles. It's directed to nobody. It has a purpose, yes, which is training the muscle, because the position of sujood, if done is the correct and nice way, is very good for the neck muscle and so on, for example. The sport is not ibadah and so on. So they got stuck until they admit that it is directed to something. The brain will try to answer there. For example, they say niyyah. What's the intention? It's not the intention, it's the content of belief. The niyyah is also not relevant. What's relevant? What's the content of belief? If the content of belief, that entity is having some divine aspect, then the action is directed to him, is an action of ibadah, is an act of ibadah based on believing in certain divinity aspect, which is physically outwardly exactly the same action, which is have no direction, like sujood for as a ruku' is not clear because the position of ruku' is available in many forms of sports. Sujood is rarely, but it can be incorporated. It has very great benefits for the neck and for the knees and things like that. If it's done, especially from young years, you get trained and you develop certain position and so on. Especially we have, how many sujood we have in the day? Maybe 17 or something like that. If you count, I think more even than that. Because every rak'ah has 2 sujood, so it's maybe more than 30. But that's a good repetition to have if it's done properly, with the lifting the shoulder and so on, and putting the head and the nose and so on well on the ground. It is good for the neck muscle. Try it. Try to watch while you're doing it as a sport, what it does to the neck for sure. Directed to nobody. And the niyyah is to strengthen the muscle, or hopefully gain some smoothness of the movement and so on, and unlock the joints and things like that. Yeah. So you see the dilemma there, both from physical reality, both from Quran and so on, concerning sujood. And the same with ruku', same with anything else. Yeah. So, but you see, as I said in the forward, we discussed the issue ad nauseum. Someone said this is more enough. We should stop there and stop here. Yeah, could stop here, but we'll continue since the book is available, and some people need repetition hundreds of times until things enlighten in their mind. Yeah, carry on.
Because these are the only valid legal texts, and even before that, from the necessities of sensory perception, reason, and language, we establish with certainty the opposite of what this position suggests. Next section. The deity is the one that is worshipped. Firstly, as we have explained here in general terms, the matter has been conclusively resolved with rigorous evidence in favor of the first approach to the definition of the ibadat. Among the proofs for this are the statement that Ilah is the one who is worshipped, implies that that uluhiyah is not an inherent attribute of Allah, exalted and glorified, that he was not always a deity in eternity. This is plain and explicit kufr. The proponents of this position cannot escape this conclusion by claiming that Ilah is the one who is rightfully worshipped, or that Ilah is the one deserving of worship, because these formulations also imply that Allah, glorified and exalted, was not always a deity in eternity. This too is plain and explicit kufr and necessitates the denial of the Quran.
A bit deeper and hidden, yeah. But Razi explained it, gave the example that he is not an ilah for the mentally deranged and the babies and so on, and the animals, because they are not capable of receiving and understand the meaning and so on.
This second approach in itself, a denial of sensory perception, a contradiction to the consensus of rational people from various linguistic backgrounds, and the rejection of the divine ordering, exalted and glorified is he, of worship based on uluhiyah, as expressed in verses such as, "We never sent any messenger before you without revealing to him, there is no God but me, so serve me." And the next verse, "I am Allah, there is no God but me, so worship me and keep up the prayer so that you remember me."
Yeah, we mentioned these ayahs before. Say one translated, serve me, should be enslave yourself to me, and the other worship should be also enslave yourself to me. But one translated is closer to the Arabic wording, another one is to the common word in English. Both of them are not the best translation. The best will enslave me, and then in parentheses, worship, venerate, things like that. That would be the best way to have the meaning, the taste of the meaning of ibadah in Arabic, which is the closer to really the fundamental meaning. And especially when we look at the one aspect which is usually neglected and not understood by most people or ignored, or like, for example, by Christian especially, is that what Ali ibn Hadim objected to from one scholar. So for him, the issue of legislation and so on is not an issue of divinity and things like that, and divine aspects, which is the most important divine aspect. So enslave yourself to me means absolute obedience, and let out, and don't worship anybody else for that, or don't enslave yourself to anybody else, meaning don't obey anybody else unless I give you order and for what reason I specify. For the obedience, we know that certain obedience is commanded by Allah, and and we know the reason for that. And even that command cannot contradict fundamental necessity. Like He cannot command, otherwise Allah is contradictory to Allah. He cannot command you to obey someone who ordered you to disobey him, as if he's saying, "Obey me by disobeying me." This is nonsense. It doesn't come from mentally deranged, let alone for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And things like that. So even this order for us to obey someone else is restricted to that specific entity and to the specific area specified, the authority given to him, which cannot be unlimited, and also fulfilling the fundamental condition. It cannot be that you are authorized and allowed to obey him in disobedience to Allah. No obedience to a creature in disobedience to the Creator. Fundamental ruling dictated by reason, but there's hadith mutawatira in that. Definitely there's hadith mutawatira and things like that. So translation enslave yourself to me is the best to cover hakimiyya. And if it's covered hakimiyya, it covers everything below that. And there would be nobody then objecting like Ali ibn Hatim. But for Christian, the problem happened is that all the Christianity of here at the time of Prophet, the original Christianity was extinct, and it's revived by Islam itself. Islam is the real original Christianity. But that's what remained is Pauline Christianity or Paulinity, but they call it Christianity. But they call that either deceiving themselves or it's not Christianity, it's Pauline Christianity. It's based on Paul's statement that the kingdom of Christ, where he rules, is otherworldly, not here. So he doesn't rule in this world. And specifically, he said, by dying on the cross, he liberated us from the curse of the law of Musa. So the law has become a curse. And the death of Christ removed that. And he said, we'll never listen to anybody who will take away the freedom given to us by Christ. So secularism in the most vicious form is established by Paul. And based on that, the Roman Empire is doing fine. Don't interfere with him. Obey him. Obey him. Because the law is already gone. It was a curse. And Christ liberated us from that. Game over. Absolute secularism. Meaning, hakimiyya and the supremacy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is negated. Allah is not the ultimate sovereign. Obviously, it's internally contradictory, but doesn't matter. All beliefs of the mushrikeen is internally contradictory, can be refuted by a rational argument, but that's refutable, and that is invalid. Does not mean that some people believe in it, and that belief is what counts. That belief what counts. That belief is that what counts. That's it. So that's all the existing Christianity now. I don't think there are some people now, new ones calling Unitary Church, and some rejecting Paul. And there's a school in America calling Christ only, meaning Christ only, not Paul. And they say Paul is an apostate. Actually, in the Acts of the Apostles, they call the Book of Acts, the abbreviations Acts of the Apostles. In the Book of Acts, there's a meeting in Jerusalem, Beit al-Maqdis, in which Paul was invited after he started these singular ideas, and he was invited. And the leader of the church, the brother of Isa, the one who was the Khalifa, he told him, listen, you have apostatized from the law. ارتدت. You are committing ridda. You could apostasy from the law. Usually it is not translated like that. And one scholar, I saw a video recently, amazingly, in Latin, in Greek, it says apostatiza or something like that. And the church and everyone translated another word. Why don't they say just apostatize? In English, we have the word. What happened to them? So he's advocating Christianity, Christ only, no, no, no Paul. But that's the reality. Whatever available, Catholicism, Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, all of them are, for them, Paul is one of the apostles and is a saint. So they are, by necessity, they are secular. And the divine sovereignty is not defined for them, it's ill-defined. It's cancelled by Christ. They gave it up. He liberated us from that, made us sovereign by our own selves, which is impossible rationally, but it doesn't matter impossible rationality. That's the belief, and based on it is secularism. Based on and that alone is a major shirk in all these Christian schools, whatever they say otherwise. Besides the shirk in the divine essence, that three persons in one substance, which is also impossible in itself, because there's no divine substance, there's only one divine being. You have a substance if you have various things, like you have a hammer, you have a saw, and so on, and you say all of them from sources of iron, but there's also something called stuff, which is called divinity, in which you cut various individuals. No, there's none. There's only one divine being, just one. Simple, absolutely simple, indivisible, unbreakable. So you cannot cut several from it. That's only one. And unique, that's it. And absolutely simple, undividable. So, but still, if they believe in three persons sharing the divine substance, that's shirk in essence. All this is impossible. It's not a possibility. So don't get confused. I think that a belief can be shown immediately as being internally contradictory, meaning the belief does not exist. It exists in the mind of the believer and his accounting and his vision of awareness based on this false belief. Yes, if you explain to him and he's fair-minded, say, oh, okay, A'udhu Billah, I was mistaken, that's clearly impossible, then he ceases to believe that and ceases to be mushrik, for example. But as long as he believes that, disregarding it can be, it has an evidence or no evidence, or a blind faith, or inherited from the parents, it's still his belief, and he's still responsible for the worldview around that. He may be not punishable if he inherited and didn't get any message on anyone clarifying to him the truth, and he lives on that. Cannot be considered Yawm al-Qiyamah as being fully or partly sinful. That's something else. But they show you what's the content of the belief. Is there attribution of any divinity, including Hakimiyya? That is, say Hakimiyya is the peak of Uluhiyya. In the Islamic definition of Uluhiyya, obviously, not in the definition of Paul or so-called Christian, they actually Pauline Christian. No, it's the correct definition according to the Quran. And it has to be regarded always as the peak. And that's where many types of shirk, the shirk of Hakimiyya, adopting monks and scribes and scholars and rulers and so on, gods beside Allah, or lords beside Allah, can get away. So, no problem. We don't have an idol. We don't making pilgrims to the graves. No, my dear friend, they don't need to do that. Just accepting them that they have ruling power and legislating power. They have the ultimate rule, the ultimate sovereignty. That's it. That's the type of shirk. Because many people have the idea in the shirk. In India, we know shirk. We can't see there's a temple with Shiva, and there's another for Vishnu, and they're different deities, different colors, different bows, different strength, comparable, and so on. And there's a bigger one, older one called Brahma, fine, and so on. These are really, that's the clear paganism and shirk. The same in China, the same in Japan, the same in the Amazon, but not by Christian, except the issue of Isa. And they say, oh, it's actually not multiple gods. It's one God in three in one, which is impossible. But no, it's actually the shirk. Forget about Trinity. Go to monks and scribe and legislation. And even Isa mentioned the ayah, this is a fine point of the والمسيح ابن مريم. This is what Paul said. Masih ibn Maryam is Lord beside Allah. He cancelled the divine sovereignty and made it, and got us by dying on the cross, got all the Sharia abrogated by Sharia that now made us sovereign, the freedom given to us by Christ. Not going to give that up and listen to the guys in Jerusalem who are still believing in the Sharia, even if partly modified by Isa, Sharia. No, no, no. Don't listen to them. They don't know what they are saying. I know what they say. I met Isa in spirit, and he told me, "Khalas, after crucifixion, the world is different than before. Now it's sovereignty of man. So that he can give sovereignty to man means he's a sovereign. So he's the Rabb. تأخذ أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله والمسيح ابن مريم. And then the comment there, وما أمروا إلا ليعبدوا إلها واحدا. That's where Adi ibn Hatim objected. وأمروا ليعبدوا إلها واحدا. For Isa, he understood it maybe that he's praised, we sing to him, we ask him help, we ask him forgiveness directly. Maybe that, okay, that sounds like a classical ibadah. But how come that the monks and scribes or scholars are included in that? So definitely Muhammad is mistaken. Let me just object to that, see what he means really, and then explain that one. But actually the ayah put these monks and scribes and Masih ibn Maryam in the same level, أربابا, lords beside Allah. اتخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله, and also المسيح ابن مريم ربا من دون الله, talking here about ربوبية. And then said this is violation of the principle. وأمروا ليعبدوا إلها واحدا. They were commanded to worship or to slave themselves to one divine being. And they know that Allah, the main divine being, is not Isa, is not a monk, is not a scribe. So all of that being Rabb, meaning they being thus an Ilah beside Allah and being enslaved to, being a worship offered to them. And that's what is objected to, not for Isa specifically, because it could be a borderline, there could be a dispute about that. But for these, clearly, no hymns, no songs, no rosaries, nothing is done to them. So what's the problem? How you messenger of Allah? He said it was a messenger of Allah because he is in President Medina. They will not say, oh, we caught you red-handed. No, he said, is that not the story? That's the definition of worship. That's the correct definition of worship. And it's highest level, which is far away from his mindset because Christianity had been deformed such a way that really divine sovereignty has been negated. Yeah. Okay. So carry on.
Okay. Secondly, as we will explain in detail, particularly concerning many of the actions that the Wahhab sect and falsely and slanderously label as acts of worship, ibadat, action by action, in a separate chapter, specifically the chapter dedicated to the essence of sanctification and ritual acts of worship. The third position involves incorporating the act of ilah into the definition of ibadah, such that one might say, for example, ibadah is everything directed towards an ilah. Simultaneously, it involves incorporating ibadah into the definition of ilah, such that one might say the ilah is the one who is worshipped. Consequently, ibadah cannot be defined until Allah is defined. And at the same time, ilah cannot be defined until ibadah is defined.
And this is circular.
That is circular reasoning that renders either definition impossible, leaving both terms undefined. The result is nothing more than an empty tautology. Ibadah is ibadah, a meaningless conclusion with no substance or benefit. Similarly, the ilah is the ilah. The circular reasoning is subtly present in the writings of Imam Ibn Taymiyyah and Shaykh Abdul Rahman ibn Yahya al-Mu'allimi, and it appears frequently in the writings of Wahhabi scholars, both covertly and overtly. This is unsurprising, as they are entirely bankrupt when it comes to auxiliary evidence sciences such as linguistics, logistics, mathematics, let alone any other rational sciences. In terms of the fourth position, this involves separating the concept of ilah from the actions of the worshippers, giving it a definition independent of their actions, while simultaneously classifying certain actions as actions in and of themselves as ibadah, regardless of the perception or belief of the one performing them, as is the case with the second position. This necessarily implies that the worship of anyone other than Allah cannot be shirk unless the other is a deity. This position is a denial of sensory perception, reason human nature and language, and it blatantly contradicts the wording of the Quran, of the Quranic wording. It also implies that the Quran is incapable of expressing itself correctly, or that it misleads its audience, as seen in the verse, أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا اللَّهِ, worship no one but Allah. According to this view, the verse should have said, do not worship any deity except Allah, exalted as Allah above such claims. This also entails an explicit rejection of the ordering in the verse mentioned previously, I am Allah, there is no God but me, so worship me, which is only possible if one believes that the Quran is not from Allah, an outright form of kufr. I do not know of anyone in the world who has openly adopted this position or followed this path without evasion or subterfuge. This is nothing more than the circular reasoning mentioned in the third position, whether hidden or manifest. Conclusions. From all that has been previously stated, it becomes clearly evident that the deviant and extremist Wahhabi sect has misclassified certain actions of ibadat, acts of worship, merely based on their external form, or based on a prior belief about harm, benefit, intercession, blessings, proximity, and so forth. Without regard to the presence or absence of the specific belief that makes such actions ibadah, which is belief in some aspects of uluhiyah, divinity, as properly defined by the Quran, they then passed judgments of shirk and kufr on those performing such acts, expelling them from Islam, merely based on these acts, and raised the sword against them. The Wahhabi sect even went so far as to audaciously label this falsehood and blatant lie as Tawheed, specifically Tawheed al-Ibadah. They then compounded this crime by referring to it as Tawheed al-Uluhiyah, as can be found, for instance, in لانات المستفيد بشرح Kitab At Tawheed by Salih ibn Fawzan al-Fawzan. Since Tawheed is of three types, Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, Tawheed al-Asma al-Safa, the majority of this book focuses on the second type, which is Tawheed al-Ibadah. Similarly, in Abdurrazak al-Rajhi's Sharh al-Aqidah al-Tahawiyah, he states, as for the Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, it is the oneness of Allah through the actions of worshippers, through their actions, O humans, such as prayer, zakat, fasting, pilgrimage, righteousness to parents, maintaining kinship ties. These are your actions. Enjoining good, forbidding evil, refraining from prohibitions, and drawing closer to Allah through these actions and dedicating them to Allah alone, seeking His face and the hereafter. This is Tawheed al-Ibadah. In contrast, even the compilers of English dictionaries have fared better, as they define worship according to its natural and intuitive meaning, stating a sense of reverence paid to a supernatural or divine being. Therefore, it is both legally and rationally necessary to affirm that whenever the term ibadah or its derivatives appear in the discussions of Tawheed and Shirk, faith and disbelief, or idols and deities in the Quran, the prophetic Sunnah, or the speech of the Thalaf, especially the Sahaba who witnessed revelation and had pure hearts and minds, it must be understood as referring to inner states, psychological reactions, physical actions, and verbal expressions that are preceded by a specific belief. That belief, which is in some aspect of uluhiyah, in the object to whom these actions are directed. Any other understanding leads to contradictions, circular reasoning, or denial of sensory and historical realities, and ultimately to denial of the Quran itself, and is as in the case of the Wahhabi sect, who wrongly believe they are in the right. And this concludes this chapter. Okay.
So we discussed that there, because the Wahhabi reversed it. Instead of he is well defined by certain attribution things, or certain attribution to these things, rightly or wrongly, but attribution, and based on that, an acts directed to these things of veneration, of love, of affection, of even external acts and so on can be called ibadah. That's the correct one. Second one is the opposite. There is a certain list of acts and so on, which, if directed to anything, makes that thing a divine being. Although they not see it that clearly be there. But in Ibn Abu Wahab, we say that in certain situations, like say, for example, if you do that and it at the dome or the qubba on the grave of al-Badawi, he mentioned Badawi especially because Badawi is well known even in Najd and so on. Badawi is in Egypt, in Tampa. Al-Badawi is a famous man. I think he was involved in the Crusades, fighting the Crusader and so on, and he got plenty of booty and prisoners of war and so on. And then when he died, they made the dome on his grave and so on. So if you do that, then you made the dome not only ilah. You can't believe what he said, the word he said. If you do that, then you made the dome on Qabr Allah, not ilah, Allah himself. If you read this, is the man awake or he had drugs or something like that? That's his formulation. Is quoted somewhere. I think down or previously. No, I think it came down in that chapter. So it's going to that grotesque extreme. Muhammad al-Wahhab was willing to go to that extreme, just to ultimately to get something called, which never happened anyone before that in Islam invented that term, ibadat al-qubur, shirk al-qubur. Was never mentioned in Islamic history. Was not even known by the Arabs. There was no grave veneration. There was some veneration of great persons for the graves or respect because they are great chieftains, in the sense that if someone commits a crime in Jahiliyyah, then you go to a chieftain and take protection by him. And then he protects you either by warfare or by paying, for example, blood money in your behalf, for example. Now, at least one person or two, I think, in Jahiliyyah, they had such, not only their lifetime, even after their death. If you go to their grave and take refuge there, then the tribe, the sons of this tribal chieftain, who became themselves a tribe, like Tamim has a grave, and they will defend you and pay even blood money on your behalf out of respect. So he's a tribal chieftain. He's not a deity or anything like that. And people escape there to escape from crimes or get some help with paying blood money, things like that. That's the only one. And even Rahab is not aware about that. He didn't even mention it. The only mention is the so-called Allat, who did not exist. We have discussed the story of Allat. That's the only thing which he got in historically or time of Prophet ﷺ or before to support that the Arabs, some of them are worshipping the grave of a pious man, which is Allat. And we know he's not a pious man and so on, as we have discussed the story. Either he didn't exist or he was really an idol, a priest for Allat, idol worshipper himself. So definitely not pious, have nothing to do with that. And we mentioned the story which invented by Amr ibn Luhay, that he most likely assassinated him because he was a dangerous competition, and they told the people he entered this rock and he is now merged with Allat, the goddess, which is an ancient goddess of the Babylonian. We discussed that in Shirk al-Arab anyway. So it says, whatever you go, this man, I don't know what happened to his brain. He read Ibn Taymiyyah, understood it upside down. Even Ibn Taymiyyah does not have this mess to that level, barely anything of that. And he's way too savvy not to go to such extremes. And then he just cut it away, got only that, and sharpened the sword and started killing the people based on that. Mm-hmm. It's really a situation of derangement. And because he's always taking the sword and fighting the people, you would get an isolated from the others, and the situation will be killing or being killed, not a matter of discussion and rational discourse. Exactly like Daesh now, in matter of khilaf also, not matter of belief. They're Wahhabi also in that matter of belief, but the moment they isolated themselves and they are in tunnels and then underground and so on, it's difficult to negotiate with them or discuss anything rational. However, the moment they see you or you see them fighting and erupts and everyone kill the other, no way to discuss anything. That's happened from isolation. The moment a point of view become extreme and the people start becoming violent, it's very difficult to settle matter by discourse. The only way to settle it is to just by the sword, until one group is completely exterminated or subdued to such a level that they have to listen, and then depend upon how good is your argument, you can persuade them or not. That's the only way that works, unfortunately, because they're into extreme and such odd ideas. Connected with that, you defend the idea by killing the others regarding him is worthy of killing. If it gets to that level, no way to have a rational discourse or discussion. Okay, carry on. We ended the chapter there, or is another chapter coming? Rush? Gosh.
Yeah, we finished that chapter, so that's chapter 12 is finished. We're on chapter 13 next.
What's the title of it? Let us. We'll not
It's
start it today, inshallah. What's the
okay.
time now?
It is 9:24.
I think it's good. Yeah, we can. 1.5 hours is good.
Okay,
And then we have question and so on. Yeah.
sure.
Let's start that.
So we've got this chapter 13 will be contradicted. One thing, there's some people in the chat. Somebody's raised their hand. They could
Yeah.
be
But
trolling.
what's the title of the chapter so that we can prepare our mind for it?
Okay, so it's contradictory definitions of al-muallimi.
Yeah, okay. That's discussing al-Muallimi because al-Muallimi did a great offer. He has a book of 600 pages and he went east and west and so trying to construct something which can be called ibadah, independent where it is directed. Similar to Shawkani, but a little bit more sophisticated. The Shawkani one is clearly by a little bit of analysis exposed. And Muallimi is recent. Shawkani was around the time of Abdul Wahab. I think he died 1270 or 80 Hijri. That's roughly the time of Abdul Wahab, roughly. But Al-Muallimi is just recent, as I told. I think I told last time or the time before that he was. I remember him faintly that he was visiting my grandfather Muhammad Abdul Hamza in the Haram, in his seclusion room downstairs. I think I was introduced to him. I think it was Al-Muallimi. A man was a little bit small and was highly respected, and liaising with my grandfather and discussing hadith and so on. And he's specialist in hadith and rijal and things like that. Most likely is this one. So it's contemporary. If he passed away maybe in the 70s, 80s, something like that of that century. So it's quite contemporary. Quite contemporary. So he has all these 200 years of discussion, attack, counterattacks absorbed and tried to find a solution. But solution is no solution, but we discuss it inshallah next time. Okay.
Okay. So that will be next week. We will start with chapter 13, page 129, contradictory definition of al-muallimi.